The great debate hall buzzed with voices from across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species filled the curved seats, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some floated in tanks of liquid, others perched on special platforms, and a few required breathing apparatus to survive in the station's atmosphere. David Rivers wheeled his chair through the main entrance, drawing immediate attention. Whispers followed his movement across the polished floor. His legs, or what remained of them, were hidden beneath a simple blanket. The mechanical whir of his wheelchair's motors seemed loud in the suddenly quiet space. "Is that humanity's representative?" asked Ambassador Krex, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. The reptilian diplomat's scales shifted from green to yellow, showing his amusement. "They sent a broken soldier?" The Valerian delegate, standing nearly 3 meters tall with muscles that could crush steel, laughed. "How fitting. A crippled species sends a crippled representative." David ignored the comments. He had heard worse during his recovery on Earth. Much worse. He positioned his chair at the human delegation's assigned spot and checked his tablet. The debate topic glowed on the screen. Which species poses the greatest threat to galactic peace? Council Chairman Nexar raised his staff, calling for order. His voice boomed through the translation devices. "We gathered today to discuss an important matter. Recent conflicts have shown us that some species are more dangerous than others. We must identify the greatest threats to maintain peace." The Crotan representative stood first. His species looked like walking nightmares, black chitin covering a body built for killing. "The Crotan Empire has conquered 47 worlds. Our warriors know no fear. Our claws can cut through any armor." He flexed his massive arms, each one ending in razor-sharp talons. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Everyone knew about Crotan military might. Next came the Xelian delegate, her ethereal form shimmering with psychic energy. "Physical strength is nothing compared to mental power. We can control minds, see the future, and destroy enemies without touching them." She demonstrated by lifting several objects around the room with her thoughts alone. More impressed sounds filled the hall. The hegemony representative spoke next. His mechanical voice carried no emotion. "We are logical. We do not tire. We do not fear. Our fleets are perfectly coordinated. Biological species make mistakes. We do not." On and on it went. Each species presented their case with displays of power, technology, or natural abilities. Some could breathe in space, others could survive in molten rock. A few showed weapons that could level mountains. Finally, Chairman Nexar looked toward the human section. "And what does Earth have to say?" David wheeled forward slowly. The room fell silent, waiting to hear what this obviously weak being could possibly offer. He looked around at the assembled delegates, taking in their confident expressions and superior attitudes. "Humans," he began quietly, "are not the strongest. We cannot fly without machines. We have no psychic powers. Our skin tears easily, and we die if we cannot breathe for a few minutes." Several delegates chuckled. The Crotan ambassador made a dismissive gesture. David continued, his voice steady. "We are not the smartest either. Our computers are simple compared to the hegemony. We cannot see the future like the Xelians. We live short lives compared to most of you." "Then why are we wasting time with this?" interrupted the Valerian. "Humans are clearly no threat to anyone." David smiled for the first time since entering the hall. It was not a pleasant expression. "Because, Ambassador, you are thinking about this wrong. You are all asking the wrong question." Chairman Nexar leaned forward. "Explain. You want to know which species is most dangerous. But dangerous to whom? And under what conditions?" David's hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests. "Every species here has shown me what makes them powerful. Strength, speed, intelligence, technology. All impressive." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I have fought your people before. During the contact wars, I saw Crotan warriors flee when their food supply ran out. I watched Xelian psychics collapse when they could not sleep for days. I saw hegemony fleets shut down because someone found their frequency." The room had gone completely quiet now. David's voice grew stronger. "You see, the question is not who is strongest when everything is perfect. The question is who keeps fighting when everything goes wrong, who adapts when their advantages disappear, who refuses to quit when they should be dead." He looked directly at the Crotan ambassador. "I lost my legs fighting your people on Kepler 6. My unit was surrounded, outnumbered 10 to 1. No food, no ammunition, no hope of rescue. Your warriors were stronger, faster, better armed. David's eyes never left the Croton's face. But you left first. The silence stretched on. No one spoke. No one moved. My species has a saying, David continued. It is not the size of the dog in the fight that matters. It is the size of the fight in the dog. He gestured to his wheelchair. You look at me and see weakness. You see limitation. You see someone to pity or dismiss, he smiled again. And this time several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That is exactly what I was hoping for. Chairman Nexar's voice was uncertain now. What do you mean? David straightened in his chair. I mean, honored delegates, that this debate is pointless unless we test our theories. Any species can claim to be dangerous. Any representative can give speeches about their military might. But talk is cheap. He looked around the room one more time. If you really want to know which species is most dangerous, then let us prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Let each species send one representative to demonstrate their capabilities. Winner takes all. The Valerian ambassador stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across David's wheelchair. Are you challenging us, human? David nodded. That is exactly what I am doing. The room erupted in shocked voices and heated arguments. Some delegates called the suggestion foolish. Others seemed intrigued. A few looked angry at the apparent insult. Through it all, David sat quietly in his wheelchair, watching and waiting. He had achieved his first goal. He had their attention. Now the real work could begin. Arguments raged across the debate hall for nearly an hour. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages while their translation devices struggled to keep up. Some species demanded David be removed for his insulting suggestion. Others seemed genuinely curious about what the human had in mind. Chairman Nexar finally restored order by activating the hall's sound dampeners. The sudden silence felt heavy and oppressive. Representative Rivers, Nexar said slowly, your proposal is highly irregular. The Council does not normally settle disputes through combat trials. With respect, Chairman, this is not about combat. David wheeled closer to the center of the chamber. This is about survival, about adaptation, about proving which species truly deserves to be called dangerous. The Valerian ambassador crossed his arms, muscles rippling. Explain your terms, human. David activated his tablet, projecting a holographic display above his head. 3 trials. Each one tests different aspects of what makes a species dangerous. Not just strength or speed, but intelligence, adaptability, and determination. The projection showed a series of environments, a barren wasteland, a maze-like structure, and what looked like a battlefield simulation. First trial, survival in hostile conditions with limited resources. Second trial, navigate a complex problem-solving environment. Third trial, tactical combat simulation. David looked around the room. Each species sends one representative. The winner species gains enhanced voting rights in the Council and priority access to new trade routes. Several delegates exchanged glances. The stakes David had suggested were significant. And if you lose, human? Asked the Croton ambassador, his black eyes reflecting no emotion. If I lose, David replied, humanity accepts a reduced role in the Council. We step back from major decisions for the next 50 years. Gasps echoed through the chamber. David was betting his entire species' political future on his performance. The Zelian delegate floated forward, her form shimmering with psychic energy. You would risk so much, why? David's expression grew serious. Because words mean nothing. You all sit here talking about which species is most dangerous, but none of you actually know. You make assumptions based on appearance, technology, or past victories. Real danger cannot be measured that way. He gestured to his wheelchair again. You see my limitations and think I am weak. But limitations force adaptation. Weakness forces creativity. What you call disadvantages, I call training. The hegemony representative's mechanical voice cut through the murmurs. This human's logic is flawed. Physical capability determines combat effectiveness. Emotional responses create tactical errors. We calculate a 97% probability of human failure. Perfect, David said with satisfaction. That confidence is exactly what I was hoping for. Chairman Nexar consulted with the other council members through their private communication network. After several minutes, he turned back to the assembled delegates. The council finds this proposal interesting. If enough species agree to participate, we will authorize the trials. However, we require at least 5 participants to make the results meaningful. The Croton ambassador stood immediately. The Croton Empire accepts. We will demonstrate why we are the apex predators of this galaxy. The Valerian delegate nodded. Valerians fear no challenge. We accept. The hegemony will participate to prove the superiority of logical beings over emotional ones, announced the mechanical representative. The Zelian shimmered brighter. Our psychic abilities will easily overcome any trial you design. We accept. 4 species had already volunteered. David had expected this. Their pride would not let them back down from a challenge, especially one issued by what they considered an inferior being. Any other volunteers? Chairman Nexar asked. A new voice spoke from the upper levels of the chamber. The Altarian Republic accepts. David looked up to see a being that resembled a large bird, with iridescent feathers and intelligent golden eyes. The Altarians were known for their aerial superiority and keen intellect. Excellent, Nexar declared. 6 participants. The trials will begin in 3 standard days to allow for preparation. Each representative may bring basic equipment consistent with their species' normal capabilities. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, David noticed several of them watching him with new interest. Not respect exactly, but no longer the casual dismissal he had received earlier. The Croton ambassador approached his wheelchair. Up close, the creature was even more intimidating, easily twice David's size even while he was sitting, with claws that could probably cut through the wheelchair's metal frame. Human, the Croton growled. I do not understand your game, but I will enjoy demonstrating why my people are the most dangerous in the galaxy. David looked up at the towering predator without flinching. I am counting on it, Ambassador. The more confident you are, the better this will work. The Croton's head tilted slightly, confusion flickering in his black eyes, but he said nothing more before walking away. The Valerian ambassador was next, his massive form casting David in shadow. Your species defeated mine in the border wars, human. But that was fleet combat with ships and weapons. This will be personal. Yes, David agreed. It will be. As the hall emptied, David remained in his wheelchair, staring at the holographic display still floating above his tablet. 3 trials. 3 chances to prove that humanity belonged among the galaxy's major powers. But more than that, 3 chances to show these species that they had been asking the wrong questions all along. The hegemony. Representative paused beside David's chair, its optical sensors focusing on him. You realize your chances of success are statistically insignificant? David smiled. Tell me something, Ambassador. In all your calculations, did you factor in one important variable? What variable? Humans do not care about statistics when we have something to prove. The machine processed this statement for several seconds before responding. This does not compute. Exactly, David said as he wheeled toward the exit. That is why you are going to lose. Alone in the Great Hall, David allowed himself a moment of doubt. 6 species, 5 of them physically superior in every measurable way. 3 trials designed to test the very qualities where humans seemed weakest. But David had not survived the contact wars by being the strongest or the fastest. He had survived by being the most stubborn, the most adaptive, and the most unwilling to accept defeat. In 3 days, the galaxy would learn what that really meant. The real question was not whether David could win these trials. The real question was whether the other species could handle losing to someone they considered broken and weak. David suspected the answer would surprise them all. The testing facility stretched for kilometers beneath the station's main hub. David had never seen anything like it. Environmental chambers that could recreate any planet's conditions, holographic projectors that made simulations feel completely real, and monitoring systems that tracked every heartbeat and brainwave. 6 preparation chambers lined one wall, each designed for a different species' needs. David's was simple, just basic human life support and a small equipment locker. Through the transparent walls, he could see his competitors making their final preparations. The Croton sharpened his natural claws on a piece of metal, sparks flying with each stroke. His black chitin armor gleamed under the lights, and David could see the powerful muscles moving beneath the surface. The Valerian performed stretching exercises that would have broken a human's bones. His 3-meter frame moved with surprising grace for something so massive. The hegemony representative ran diagnostic checks on its internal systems, lights blinking across its metallic surface as it optimized its performance parameters. The Zelian floated in meditation, psychic energy creating small light displays around her ethereal form. The Altarian preened its iridescent feathers while reviewing holographic battle plans with tactical precision. And then there was David, sitting in his wheelchair reading a simple paper notebook. "Attention participants," came the announcement. "First trial begins in 10 minutes. Please report to staging area 1. David closed his notebook and wheeled toward the staging area. The other competitors were already there, each one radiating confidence in their own way. Even the emotionless hegemony unit seemed to carry itself with mechanical certainty. Trial Director Voss, a neutral species chosen to oversee the competition, activated the main display. First trial, survival and resource management. You will be placed in a simulated hostile environment with limited supplies. The goal is not just to survive, but to thrive. Duration, 24 hours. The display showed a barren landscape, rocky terrain broken by deep crevasses with scattered water sources and minimal vegetation. Temperature readings showed extreme swings from freezing to scorching as the artificial sun moved across the sky. Each participant receives identical basic supplies, 1 day's worth of food and water, basic tools, and emergency shelter materials. No weapons, no advanced technology. Questions? The Croton raised one massive arm. What defines success beyond mere survival? Resource acquisition, shelter improvement, preparation for long-term survival, and adaptation to changing conditions, Director Voss replied. You will be scored on efficiency, innovation, and sustainability. David studied the terrain map carefully. The others were focused on the obvious resources: water sources, potential shelter locations, food gathering areas. But David noticed something else. The pattern of rock formations suggested underground water systems, and the vegetation distribution hinted at seasonal changes. Participants, enter your starting positions. The environmental chamber transformed around them. One moment they were standing in a sterile room. The next they were surrounded by harsh wilderness. The illusion was perfect. David could feel the heat from the artificial sun and smell the dry air. 6 starting positions were marked, each about a kilometer apart. David's was near a rocky outcrop that offered some shade but little else. The others had similar locations, no advantage to any one participant. Trial begins now. The Croton immediately began hunting for food, his predator instincts taking over. His enhanced senses could detect small creatures hiding in the rocks. The Valerian used his massive strength to move boulders, creating an impressive shelter in just minutes. The hegemony representative began a methodical survey of the area, mapping resources with mathematical precision. The Zelian used her psychic abilities to sense water sources and potential dangers from a distance. The Altarian took to the air, gaining a bird's-eye view of the entire area. David did none of these things. Instead, he set up his basic shelter exactly as provided, ate one small portion of his food, and began digging a shallow hole near his position. The monitoring systems tracked every participant's actions, broadcasting them to the observation chamber where council delegates watched in fascination. "What is the human doing?" asked the Valerian ambassador. "He appears to be playing in the dirt." Director Voss checked the sensor readings. "He is digging, but the purpose is unclear. The location shows no signs of water or resources." Hours passed. The artificial sun climbed higher and temperatures soared. The Croton had caught several small creatures and was feasting. The Valerian had built an elaborate stone fortress. The hegemony unit had cataloged every resource within 2 kilometers. The Zelian had located 3 hidden water sources. The Altarian had mapped optimal routes throughout the territory. David was still digging, now in a different location. Sweat poured down his face despite the shade from his basic shelter. "The human's behavior is irrational," observed the hegemony delegate. "He is expending energy without apparent purpose while his competitors gain significant advantages." As the day wore on, the other participants continued to excel. The Croton's hunting skills provided abundant protein. The Valerian's strength let him access resources others couldn't reach. The hegemony unit's planning created the most efficient resource utilization. The Zelian's psychic abilities revealed hidden opportunities. The Altarian's aerial reconnaissance provided superior tactical awareness. David kept digging. By evening, he had created several holes scattered across his territory, each one carefully positioned and precisely measured. Night fell and temperatures plummeted. The other participants retreated to their shelters, impressive constructions that demonstrated their various advantages. David's shelter remained basic and simple, But as the temperature dropped, something interesting happened. Warm air began rising from the holes he had dug throughout the day. "What is that?" asked Chairman Nexar, leaning forward in the observation chamber. Director Voss checked the environmental sensors. The human has tapped into geothermal vents. His seemingly random digging created a heating system for his shelter. But that was not all. As the artificial night progressed, David's simple shelter remained comfortable while the others, impressive as they were, struggled with the extreme temperature changes. The Croton's metabolism slowed in the cold. The Valerian's massive frame lost heat rapidly. The hegemony unit had to divert power to heating systems. The Xelian's psychic abilities weakened as she focused on staying warm. The Altarian's feathers provided insulation, but not enough for the extreme conditions. Dawn brought new challenges as the temperature swung back toward scorching. The other participants had to abandon some of their resource gathering to deal with thermal regulation. David's heating system now worked in reverse, drawing hot air away from his shelter and maintaining comfortable conditions. "How did he know?" whispered the Altarian delegate in the observation chamber. Director Voss studied the geological data. He didn't just know. He read the landscape. The rock formations, the vegetation patterns, the mineral deposits, they all indicated geothermal activity, but only if you knew how to interpret the signs. As the trial entered its final hours, the other participants began to struggle. Their impressive early advantages required constant energy to maintain. The Croton needed more food to fuel his enhanced metabolism. The Valerian's massive shelter required ongoing structural maintenance. The hegemony unit systems needed regular recalibration. The Xelian's psychic abilities drained her mental energy. The Altarian's aerial scouting was limited by stamina. David spent the final hours making small improvements to his heating system, gathering specific plants that most would consider inedible, but that provided essential nutrients and preparing for extended survival. When the trial ended, all 6 participants had survived, but the sustainability scores told a different story. The Croton had impressive short-term success but would exhaust local game within days. The Valerian shelter was magnificent, but required resources that would run out quickly. The hegemony unit's efficiency was perfect but inflexible. Any change in conditions would require complete recalculation. The Xelian had found resources others missed but had depleted her psychic reserves. The Altarian had excellent awareness but no sustainable long-term plan. David's setup was simple, efficient, and could be maintained indefinitely with minimal energy expenditure. Winner of the first trial, Director Voss announced to the shocked observation chamber, Representative David Rivers of Earth. The silence that followed was deafening. In his basic wheelchair, in his simple shelter with his crude heating system, the weak human had outperformed 5 physically superior species. The Croton ambassador stared at the display in disbelief. How is this possible? David wheeled out of the environmental chamber, sweat-stained but smiling. Because, Ambassador, you were all trying to dominate the environment. I was trying to understand it. He looked around at the assembled delegates. Strength is good. Speed is useful. Intelligence helps. But wisdom, knowing how to use what you have, that is what makes a species truly dangerous. 2 trials remained, and now everyone was watching the human very differently. The second trial chamber was completely different from the first. Instead of a natural environment, David found himself looking at a massive 3-dimensional maze that stretched up into shadows and down into depths he could not see. Platforms, bridges, and pathways connected at impossible angles, creating a structure that seemed to defy logic. Second trial. Complex problem-solving under pressure, Director Voss announced to the 6 participants. This maze contains multiple objectives. You must retrieve 5 specific items and return to the starting position within 6 hours. However, the maze changes configuration every hour. David studied the holographic map they were shown for 30 seconds before it disappeared. The other participants had done the same, but their approaches would be very different. Additional challenge, Voss continued. You are not alone in the maze. Automated defenders will attempt to stop you. They are not programmed to cause permanent harm, but they will use force to prevent you from reaching your objectives. The Croton cracked his knuckles with sounds like breaking bones. Physical obstacles. My specialty. The Altarian spread her wings slightly. 3-dimensional navigation. Child's play for a flying species. The hegemony representative ran quick calculations. Maze parameters stored. Optimal path algorithms prepared. The Zelian's form shimmered. I will sense the items and defenders before encountering them. The Valerian flexed his massive arms. Brute force will overcome any defender. David said nothing. He was thinking about something else entirely. The fact that Director Voss had said they were not alone, but had not specified how many other entities were in the maze. Participants. Take your positions. The maze materialized around them. David immediately noticed that his starting platform had ramps instead of stairs. The maze had been designed with his wheelchair in mind. But he also noticed something else. Scuff marks on the platforms, suggesting previous use. Trial begins now. The other participants immediately scattered in different directions, each following their planned approach. The Croton charged forward, ready to fight through any obstacle. The Altarian took to the air, soaring toward the upper levels. The Valerian began moving platforms by sheer strength. The hegemony unit followed its calculated optimal path. The Zelian floated forward, guided by psychic intuition. David wheeled to the edge of his platform and stopped. He waited. In the observation chamber, delegates watched in confusion as 5 participants spread throughout the maze while the human remained motionless. What is he doing now? Asked the Croton ambassador. Perhaps the challenge is too difficult for his limited mobility, suggested the Valerian delegate. But Chairman Nexar was studying David's position more carefully. He is listening, and David was listening, not just with his ears but with every sense he had developed during years of military service. The maze was not empty. The other participants were making noise as they moved. Footsteps, wing beats, mechanical servos, the hum of psychic energy. But there were other sounds too. Clicking, whirring, the soft pad of feet that were not human. Croton, Valerian, Altarian, Hegemony, or Zelian. David had spent enough time in hostile territory to recognize the sounds of an ambush being prepared. The first scream came from the Croton's direction, a roar of pain and fury. Then the Altarian's cry of alarm as something struck her in mid-flight. The Valerian's curses echoed through the maze as multiple attackers swarmed his position. Even the hegemony unit's calm voice carried a note of concern as it reported, "Unplanned variables encountered." Only the Zelian made no sound. But David could see psychic energy flashing in the distance as she defended herself. Through it all, David waited on his starting platform, listening and learning. The automated defenders were not simple obstacles. They were intelligent, coordinated, and adaptive. More importantly, they were learning from each encounter with the participants. After 10 minutes, David finally began to move. But instead of heading toward any of the marked objectives, he wheeled along the outer edge of the maze, staying in areas that offered cover and concealment. The human is avoiding the objectives, observed the hegemony delegate. This strategy cannot succeed. But David was not avoiding the objectives. He was gathering intelligence. From his position on the maze's periphery, he could observe the defenders in action. They were sleek, multi-limbed creatures with advanced sensory equipment. More importantly, they were working together, sharing information about the participants' capabilities and adjusting their tactics accordingly. The Croton was powerful but predictable. The defenders had already adapted to his charging attacks and were now using his own strength against him. The Altarians' aerial advantage was being countered by defenders that could leap incredible distances and had ranged weapons. The Valerians' brute force approach was being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The hegemony units' logical patterns were being analyzed and predicted by the defenders' own computational systems. The Zelian psychic abilities were being countered by defenders with mental shielding. But the defenders had not encountered David yet. They had no data on his capabilities, no pattern to analyze, no predictable behavior to counter. David smiled grimly and began to move toward the first objective. His approach was unlike anything the others had attempted. Instead of fighting through the defenders or trying to avoid them entirely, David did something unexpected. He helped them. When a group of defenders was chasing the Croton through a lower level of the maze, David created a distraction that drew their attention away, allowing the Croton to escape, but also observing how the defenders communicated and coordinated. When the Altarian was cornered by aerial defenders, David activated a maze mechanism that changed the platform configuration, creating new escape routes. The Altarian escaped, but David learned how the maze's systems worked. "What is the human strategy?" asked Director Voss, genuinely puzzled. He appears to be helping his competitors, but David was not helping them. He was using them. Each rescue taught him something new about the defenders, the maze, or his fellow participants. More importantly, he was building a reputation among the defenders as a non-threat, something to be monitored but not actively opposed. By the time David reached the first objective, the defenders barely reacted to his presence. He had become part of the background, a minor player not worth significant attention. The first objective was a small crystal that pulsed with energy. David picked it up easily and tucked it into his wheelchair's storage compartment. No defenders interfered. The second and third objectives went similarly. David had become invisible to the threat detection systems by being helpful rather than aggressive, predictable rather than chaotic, and cooperative rather than competitive. But the fourth objective changed everything. As David approached the platform holding the fourth crystal, he found the Zelian there first. She was surrounded by defenders, her psychic abilities nearly exhausted from hours of fighting. "Human," she gasped. "Help me, please." David looked at the situation. The Zelian had 3 crystals already. She was his closest competitor. Helping her would give her a significant advantage. The logical choice was to let the defenders overwhelm her and take the crystal himself. Instead, David wheeled directly into the middle of the defender formation. "Back off," he told them calmly. "She is with me." The defenders, confused by this development, hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, David grabbed the fourth crystal and tossed it to the Zelian. "Go, get the fifth one. I will handle this." The Zelian stared at him in shock, then floated away as quickly as her depleted energy allowed. The defenders turned their attention to David, finally recognizing him as a threat, but it was too late. David had spent hours studying their patterns, their communication methods, their tactical preferences. "You learn fast," David told them as they circled his wheelchair. "But you make the same mistake everyone else does. You assume that mobility means legs." David's wheelchair suddenly transformed. Hidden mechanisms activated, revealing that it was not just a mobility aid but a sophisticated piece of equipment. Electromagnetic pulse generators disabled the defenders' electronics. Sonic disruptors confused their sensory systems. And most importantly, the chair could move in ways that legs never could. Sideways, diagonally, even briefly airborne using compressed gas jets. Within minutes, David had disabled or evaded every defender on the platform. He retrieved the fifth crystal, just as the maze began its final configuration change. "Participants," came Director Voss's voice. "You have 30 minutes to return to the starting position with all 5 objectives." David looked around the maze. The other participants were scattered throughout the structure, some with multiple crystals, others with none. The maze's new configuration had created barriers between them and the exit, but David had spent the entire trial learning not just how to navigate the maze, but how to control it. Using techniques observed during his rescues of the other participants, David began activating maze mechanisms in sequence. Platforms moved, bridges extended, barriers lowered. He was not just solving the puzzle, he was rewriting it. One by one, he created clear paths for each participant to reach the starting position. The Crotan, confused but grateful, followed the route David had opened. The Altarians soared along a corridor of aligned platforms. The Valerian walked across bridges that had not existed minutes before. The hegemony unit calculated the new optimal path and followed it efficiently. With 5 minutes remaining, all 6 participants had returned to the starting area with all 5 crystals. "Impossible," breathed the Crotan ambassador in the observation chamber. How did they all succeed? Director Voss checked the recordings multiple times before announcing the results. Winner of the second trial, Representative David Rivers of Earth. Reason: while all participants retrieved the 5 objectives, only the humans solved the underlying challenge. "What underlying challenge?" demanded the Valerian delegate. "The maze was not a competition," Director Voss explained. "It was a leadership test. The participants were never meant to work against each other. They were meant to work together. Only the human recognized this and acted accordingly." David wheeled to the center of the chamber and looked around at his fellow participants. The real objective was never the crystals. It was proving that we could cooperate instead of compete, that we could solve problems together instead of fighting each other for limited resources. He turned to address the observation chamber directly. You want to know which species is most dangerous? It is not the one that can defeat all the others. It is the one that can unite all the others. 2 trials complete. 2 victories for the species everyone had dismissed as weak. 1 trial remained, and now everyone understood that they had been underestimating humanity from the very beginning. The final trial chamber was stark and simple compared to the previous 2. A circular arena with white walls, bright lighting, and absolutely nothing else. No props, no equipment, no environmental hazards. Just empty space and 6 participants. David wheeled to his designated position, noting that the others were no longer looking at him with contempt or dismissal. After 2 unexpected victories, he had earned their respect, even if they did not understand how he had achieved it. Director Voss's voice echoed through the chamber. Final trial, direct confrontation. This is not a test of cooperation or environmental adaptation. This is a test of individual capability under extreme pressure. The chamber walls displayed a simple bracket system. 6 participants would face off in one-on-one matches, with winners advancing to the next round. Rules are simple, Voss continued. Matches end when 1 participant yields, becomes unable to continue, or after 30 minutes. Causing permanent injury will result in disqualification. You may use any natural abilities or equipment you brought to the trials. David's first opponent was the hegemony representative. The mechanical being stood 3 meters tall, with armor plating that could deflect energy weapons and computational systems that could process battle scenarios faster than any biological mind. In the observation chamber, the delegates had no doubt about this match's outcome. The human has been clever in the previous trials, admitted the Croton ambassador. But this is direct combat. Logic against emotion, machine against flesh. There is no strategy that can overcome such a disparity in capability. The arena walls became transparent, allowing full observation. David wheeled to one side of the circle while the hegemony unit positioned itself opposite him. Match begins now. The hegemony unit immediately began advancing, its optical sensors analyzing David's position, calculating attack vectors and defensive options. Its movements were perfectly efficient, wasting no energy on unnecessary actions. David did not move. He sat in his wheelchair, watching the machine approach with what appeared to be complete calm. The hegemony unit stopped 3 meters away, well within its combat range but not yet engaged. Human David Rivers, you have demonstrated unexpected capabilities in previous trials. However, this scenario eliminates variables that allowed your success. Surrender is the logical choice. You know, David said conversationally, you are absolutely right. In a straight fight between us, you would win in about 15 seconds. Your reaction time, processing power, and physical capabilities are all superior to mine. The hegemony unit processed this statement. Then you will surrender? I did not say that. David smiled. I said you would win in a straight fight. But who said anything about fighting straight? Before the machine could respond, David wheeled forward at maximum speed. Not toward the hegemony unit, but past it, using the arena's circular configuration to build momentum. The machine turned to track him, but David was already changing direction, using his wheelchair's maneuverability to stay just outside the unit's optimal engagement range. Evasion tactics detected, the machine announced. Adjusting pursuit algorithms. But David was not just evading. He was talking. Tell me something, David called out as he circled the arena. What is your primary programming directive? Mission completion with minimal resource expenditure, the machine replied automatically, while trying to predict David's movement pattern. And what is your definition of mission success in this trial? The machine paused for a crucial millisecond while accessing its trial parameters. Victory over assigned opponent through combat superiority. Wrong, David said, suddenly reversing direction and causing the machine to overshoot its intercept course. Your mission is to prove which species is most dangerous. Victory in individual combat is just one metric. The hegemony unit recalculated its approach, trying to corner David against the arena wall. Clarification irrelevant. Combat parameters are clear, are they? David spun his wheelchair in place, facing the machine directly for the first time since the match began. You have been chasing me for 5 minutes. In that time, Have you learned anything about human combat capabilities? The machine stopped, processing this question with more attention than David's previous statements. Insufficient data gathered. Human evasion patterns are irregular. Exactly. Insufficient data. David's voice grew more serious. Your species prides itself on logical analysis, but you are trying to analyze an illogical opponent. How do you calculate the behavior of someone who refuses to behave according to your calculations? For the first time since the match began, uncertainty flickered through the machine's optical displays. David continued. Your programming assumes that all beings will act according to logical self-interest. But what happens when you encounter a being that acts according to principles instead of logic? What happens when survival is not the highest priority? This does not compute, the machine admitted. No, it does not. And that is exactly my point. David wheeled closer to the now stationary machine. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It is not our strength or speed or intelligence. It is our absolute refusal to be predictable when it matters most. The machine's optical sensors focused on David with new intensity. Explain. We do things that make no logical sense. We fight battles we cannot win. We sacrifice ourselves for strangers. We keep trying when success is mathematically impossible. David was now directly in front of the machine, well within its combat range. Your species sees this as weakness. You are wrong. Logical inconsistency is a flaw, not a strength. David smiled. Is it? Tell me, what would happen if your species encountered an enemy that could not be calculated? An opponent whose behavior defied all logical prediction? How would your perfect efficiency handle true chaos? The machine processed this question for several seconds. During that time, David reached into his wheelchair's storage compartment and pulled out something that made the entire observation chamber gasp. It was one of the crystals from the previous trial. But not just any crystal. It was the one David had given to the Zelian, the one he had sacrificed his own advantage to let her claim. How do you have that? The machine asked. She gave it back to me, David replied simply. After the trial ended, she returned it. Said I had earned it more than she had. David held up the crystal so the machine's sensors could analyze it fully. Your calculations assumed this match was about individual capability. But humans do not fight as individuals. We fight as part of something larger than ourselves. The machine's optical displays flickered rapidly as it tried to process this development. This was not. The parameters do not account for what? For trust? For loyalty? For the fact that cooperation can continue beyond the official boundaries of a test? David placed the crystal back in his storage compartment. You are right that you could defeat me in combat, but you cannot defeat what I represent. The machine stood motionless for a long moment, its processing systems working at maximum capacity. Finally, it spoke. I yield. The arena fell silent. In the observation chamber, delegates stared in shock as the most logically perfect species in the galaxy surrendered to a human in a wheelchair. David's second match was against the Altarian. The bird-like being circled overhead, using her aerial superiority to stay out of reach while analyzing his capabilities. But instead of trying to ground her or find some tactical advantage, David did something unexpected. He began to sing. It was an old human song, something his father had taught him during childhood. The melody was simple, but the harmony was complex, designed for multiple voices. The Altarian landed, curious despite herself. What are you doing? Singing, David replied. My species does it when we are happy, sad, afraid, or excited. Sometimes we do it just because we like the sound. This is combat, not performance. Is it? David continued the melody. Or is this a demonstration of what makes each species unique? You could defeat me easily in aerial combat, but can you do this? David's song grew more complex, incorporating rhythms and harmonies that required not just vocal ability, but emotional expression. The Altarian tried to imitate the sounds, but her vocal structure was not designed for human music. I do not understand the purpose of this activity, she said. There is no purpose. That is the point. David's voice carried genuine warmth. Humans do not do everything for logical reasons. We create beauty because we can. We make art because it makes us feel something. We sing because silence is too empty. The Altarian studied him with her intelligent golden eyes. You are trying to demonstrate that your species has qualities beyond tactical capability. I'm trying to demonstrate that tactical capability is not the only measure of value. David finished his song and looked up at her. Your species has incredible aerial grace and tactical intelligence. My species has something else. Neither is better or worse. They are just different. The Altarian considered this for a long moment. Then she began to sing, not an imitation of David's melody, but in her own species' traditional song form. The sound was beautiful in a completely different way, like wind through crystal formations. Together, human and Altarian created something that neither could have achieved alone. After their voices faded, the Altarian spoke quietly. I yield. Not because you defeated me, but because you showed me that defeat and victory are not the only possible outcomes. David's final opponent was the Croton. The apex predator stood across the arena. Black claws extended, every muscle tensed for combat. This match would be different. The Croton would not be distracted by philosophy or impressed by cooperation. This was a being designed by evolution to kill, facing a human who could barely walk. But David had saved this confrontation for last for a reason. Before we begin, David said, I have a question for you. The Croton's black eyes narrowed. Speak quickly, human. In the contact wars, when you fought my people on Kepler-6, what do you remember about that battle? The Croton's claws flexed involuntarily. Your people fought well. Better than expected, but you retreated. Why? Tactical considerations, the Croton growled. Supply lines. Reinforcement schedules. David shook his head. No. You retreated because you realized something about humans that you had not expected. Something that scared you. The Croton's expression grew dangerous. Nothing scares the Croton. Then why? David asked quietly. Are you afraid to fight me now? The question hung in the air like a challenge. In the observation chamber, delegates held their breath. I am not afraid of you, the Croton snarled. Prove it, David replied. The Croton charged. The Croton's charge covered half the arena in 3 massive strides. His claws gleamed under the bright lights as he closed the distance to David's wheelchair with terrifying speed. David did not try to evade. He did not activate his chair's hidden capabilities. He simply sat there, watching the apex predator approach, and smiled. The Croton's claws stopped inches from David's throat. Why do you not defend yourself? The Croton demanded, his voice a low growl. Because, David replied calmly, you are not going to hurt me. I am Croton. I am bred for killing. My claws can cut through armor plating. Yes, they can, but you will not use them on me. The Croton's black eyes searched David's face, looking for fear, for deception, for any sign of the survival instinct that drove all living beings. He found none. On Kepler-6, David said quietly, you did not retreat because of supply lines or tactical considerations. You retreated because you realized that humans do not fight to win. We fight because we refuse to lose. And there is a difference. The Croton's claws trembled slightly, still poised at David's throat. Your people are apex predators. You kill to survive, to dominate, to establish territory. But when you met humans in battle, you discovered something that did not fit your understanding of the universe. David's voice grew softer, forcing the Croton to lean closer to hear. You found prey that fought back not just until they were defeated, but until they were dead. Prey that would rather die than submit. The Croton's breathing had become heavier, more labored, and that terrified you, David continued, because it meant that all your advantages, your strength, your speed, your natural weapons, only mattered if your opponent cared about living more than about winning. Humans can be killed, the Croton said, but his voice lacked conviction. Of course we can. We die easily. We are fragile and weak and slow. David leaned forward in his wheelchair, bringing his face closer to the Croton's claws. But we do not break. And that is what you learned on Kepler-6. That is what you are remembering now. The Croton's claws began to retract almost against his will. You could kill me right now, David said, easily, but it would not matter because the idea I represent would still be here. The knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy is a species that simply refuses to accept defeat. No matter how impossible the odds. The Croton stepped backward, his massive frame suddenly seeming less imposing. I do not understand, he said. You do not need to understand. You just need to accept that understanding is not always necessary. David's expression grew compassionate. Your species sees the universe as predator and prey, strong and weak, winner and loser. But humans see it differently. We see it as a place where anyone can choose to be more than what they appear to be. The Croton looked around the arena, then at the observation chamber filled with delegates from across the galaxy. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. I yield. The arena fell silent. Then slowly applause began, not from the human delegation, but from species throughout the observation chamber. Even former enemies were clapping for the display they had just witnessed. Director Voss's voice carried a note of amazement. Winner of the final trial, and overall champion of the competition, Representative David Rivers of Earth. But David was not finished. He wheeled to the center of the arena and addressed the observation chamber directly. Honored delegates, you asked which species poses the greatest threat to galactic peace, but you were asking the wrong question. The applause faded as David's words reached every translator in the chamber. The question is not which species is most dangerous to you. The question is which species is most dangerous to the forces that would destroy what we are all trying to build together. David gestured to his fellow participants, who had gathered around his wheelchair. Every species here demonstrated incredible capabilities. The Croton showed us the power of focused determination. The Valerian displayed strength that can move mountains. The hegemony proved the value of logical thinking. The Zelian revealed abilities beyond physical reality. The Altarian combined intelligence with grace. He paused, looking around the chamber. But capabilities are not the same as character. Strength is not the same as courage. Intelligence is not the same as wisdom. And power is not the same as leadership. Chairman Nexar leaned forward. What are you saying, Representative Rivers? I am saying that the most dangerous species is not the one that can defeat all the others. It is the one that can inspire all the others to be better than they thought possible. David activated his tablet, displaying the results of all 3 trials. In every test, success came not from overpowering the challenge, but from understanding it. Not from defeating the other participants, but from working with them. Not from proving superiority, but from demonstrating cooperation. The delegates began murmuring among themselves, but David was not done. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It is not our weapons, our ships, or our tactics. It is our absolute refusal to accept that things cannot be better than they are. We look at the universe and see not what is, but what could be. David's voice grew stronger. We see species that have been enemies for centuries, and we imagine them as allies. We see problems that have no solution, and we refuse to stop trying to solve them. We see barriers that cannot be crossed, and we find ways to go around them, under them, or through them. He looked directly at the Croton ambassador. On Kepler 6, we did not defeat you because we were stronger. We defeated you because we could not imagine accepting defeat, and that made us more dangerous than any weapon you had ever faced. The chamber was completely silent now. So yes, David continued, humans are the most dangerous species in this galaxy. Dangerous to despair, dangerous to hatred, dangerous to the idea that things must always be as they have always been. He wheeled closer to the observation windows. We are dangerous to anyone who would rather maintain the status quo than reach for something better. We are dangerous to every force that would divide us instead of unite us. David smiled, and this time it was not grim or determined, but genuinely warm. And that is exactly the kind of dangerous this galaxy needs. The vote was unanimous, not just for humanity as the most dangerous species, but for a new approach to galactic governance, one based on cooperation instead of competition, on shared strength instead of individual dominance, on the possibility of change instead of the certainty of conflict. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, many stopped to speak with David. Former enemies offered partnerships. Neutral species proposed cultural exchanges. Even the Croton ambassador approached, though he struggled to find words. Human David Rivers, he said finally, I think I understand now why you won these trials. Oh? David replied. Why is that? Because you were not trying to prove that humans are superior to other species. You were trying to prove that all species are capable of being better than they currently are. David nodded. And do you believe that is true? The Croton looked around the chamber, watching former enemies shake hands and former rivals make plans for joint ventures. I am beginning to, he said. Months later, David sat in his quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel returning to Earth. His notebook was filled with agreements, treaties and partnership proposals that would have been unthinkable before the trials. A soft chime announced an incoming message. David opened it to find a simple text from the Zelian representative. Thank you for showing us that strength comes in many forms. Similar messages had arrived from all the other trial participants, and from dozens of species that had not participated but had watched the broadcasts. David closed his notebook and looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere among them were worlds full of beings who had learned the same lesson he had discovered long ago during the contact wars, that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a weapon or a warrior or a warship. It is an idea whose time has come, and the idea that all species could work together, could be better together than they were apart, had definitely found its time. David Rivers, the weak human veteran, had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not in conquering other species, but in helping them conquer their own limitations. The vote had been about which species was most dangerous, but the real victory had been proving that the greatest danger to fear and hatred and division was hope. And hope, as any human could tell you, was the most dangerous force in the universe.